The blood was not hers. That was the first thing Josie told herself when she knelt in the mud and pressed both palms against the stranger's side. Because if she named it as her own fear, she would run, and she could not afford to run. Not tonight. Not when the forest was still listening. The rain had come without warning, the way it always did in the highlands above Veldmoor, arriving in cold, furious curtains that turned the dirt roads into rivers and swallowed torchlight whole. She had been walking back from the mill on the eastern edge of the village, her cloak soaked through to the linen underneath, her boots already ruined, when she nearly stepped on him. He was enormous, even collapsed against the root of a fallen oak, even with his body folded wrong, even unconscious and bleeding through a wound that should have killed any lesser creature. He was enormous. His dark hair was plastered to his face by rain and mud. His hands, broad and scarred, lay open at his sides like he had simply stopped fighting and allowed himself to fall. The wound in his side was not from a blade. Josie recognized the shape of it immediately, and the recognition made something cold move through her chest. Claws. 3 deep furrows, wide-spaced. Not a hunting accident. Not a wolf from the wild forest. Something trained, or something commanded. She should have walked away. Every sensible bone in her body said so. A stranger bleeding in the road, in the woods, at night, during a hunt, because she could hear it in the distance, hounds and horses and the low thunder of riders moving through the trees, was not her concern. She was an Omega in a village that barely tolerated her presence. She had no alpha, no pack, no protection. She had been told so many times and in so many voices that her existence was already a trespass. Taking on someone else's war was a luxury that only the strong could afford. But her hands had already found him. She could not explain it. Later she would try. She would tell herself it was instinct, or foolishness, or the particular stubbornness that had kept her alive through 3 years of being nobody's anything. But the truth, the quiet truth she would only admit to herself much later, was that something in her had recognized something in him. Not his face, not his scent, not yet, not through the blood and rain and mud. Something older than sense. A pull so faint she might have mistaken it for pity. She pressed harder against the wound, and he made no sound. He's alive, she thought. Barely, but alive. I need you to wake up, she said, low and firm, the way she spoke to injured animals she found near the mill. I need you to wake up and help me move you, because I cannot carry you alone, and I will not leave you here. He did not wake up. Josie sat back on her heels and looked at him properly for the first time. The rain made it difficult. She pushed wet hair from her face with the back of her wrist and studied him. His jaw was sharp, heavy with several days of dark stubble. There were old scars along his throat and collarbone, the kind that did not come from accidents. His clothing was expensive, or had been. The fabric of his shirt, now shredded and soaked, was too fine for a common soldier. The stitching at the collar was silver thread. She almost did not notice it under all the blood, but she noticed. Who are you? The hounds were louder now. Closer. Josie made a decision she would spend a long time questioning afterward. She pulled off her outer cloak, still sodden but thick, and pressed it tight against the wound. She tied it in place using the belt from her own dress. Then she crouched low, got her shoulder under his arm, and used every piece of her Omega stubbornness to drag him upright. He was impossibly heavy. She staggered. She caught herself. She moved. The old mill-keeper's cabin sat 300 steps into the tree line, unused since old Fernan had died the winter before. No one went there. The roof leaked in 2 places, the hearth smoked badly, and the path to it was hidden under 10 years of fallen leaves. Josie knew it because she had slept there herself, twice, during winters when the village had made its feelings about her particularly clear. She got him there. She would not be entirely certain, afterward, how. The rain helped and hindered in equal measure, softening the ground and making every step uncertain. She lost one boot in the mud and did not stop to retrieve it. When she finally pulled him through the low doorway and let him down onto the old straw pallet in the corner, she stood for a moment with her hands on her knees and simply breathed. He was still alive. She could hear it. Shallow and uneven, but present. Josie moved fast after that. She was not a healer. The village healer had made it clear long ago that Omega women had no place learning the craft. But she had spent 3 years watching from doorways and memorizing what she was told she could not learn. She found what she needed from her market basket: dried comfrey root, a small vial of oil pressed from pine needles, thread, a needle wrapped in cloth. She boiled water in the iron pot over a fire she coaxed alive with the driest wood she could find. She cleaned the wound. He woke when she pressed the cloth against it. Not gently. He came up hard, his hand catching her wrist with a grip that had no business existing in a man who had been unconscious a quarter hour ago. His eyes opened. Dark. Very dark. The color of deep water at night. And found her face. And held it. "Let go," she said. She did not flinch. "I'm cleaning the wound. If you pull my arm, I'll drop the cloth and you'll bleed on the only clean pallet I have access to." A long pause. He let go. She went back to work. He watched her. She could feel it, that careful, measuring attention, but she did not look up. She had learned not to look up when men watched her. It never helped. "Where am I?" he said. His voice was low and rough. It had the quality of something used to being obeyed. "A mill cabin. Old, empty, safe for now." She tied off the wound dressing. "There are riders in the forest. They were hunting something." She glanced up then, briefly. "I think they were hunting you." Something moved across his face. It was not surprise. "You should have left me," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I should have." She sat back and reached for the pot, poured water into a clay cup she had found on a shelf. She held it out. He looked at it. Then he looked at her again, with that same stillness. And she had the uncomfortable sense that he was reading something in her face that she had not intended to show. He took the cup. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "I didn't say that." "You're not acting afraid." Josie pulled her wet hair over one shoulder and began wringing it out, mostly because she needed something to do with her hands. "I've learned that acting afraid usually makes things worse. Are you going to tell me who you are?" "No." "Are you going to tell me why they're hunting you?" "No." She nodded slowly. "All right." He seemed to expect more. Protest, perhaps, or argument. She gave him neither. She rose and went to check the leather panel she had pulled across the doorway, peering through the gap into the dark and rain. The hounds were moving away now, west, toward the river road. "They'll be back at dawn," she said quietly, "when the rain clears. I'll be gone before then." Josie turned and looked at him properly. He was trying to push himself upright and making a poor job of it. She watched for a moment. "You've lost a great deal of blood," she said. "You will not walk out of here by dawn. You likely won't walk out of here tomorrow." He met her eyes. There was something in his gaze that was not arrogance, but was adjacent to it. A certainty, deep and old, that he had never quite learned to set down. "That is not your concern," he said. "You're in my cabin," she replied. "That makes it my concern." She said it simply, without heat. She went back to the fire and sat, and pulled her knees up, and wrapped her arms around them against the cold, and after a moment she heard him settle back onto the pallet because he had no choice. Outside, the rain hammered the old roof. In 2 places, it came through. Josie watched the fire and did not think about the riders. Did not think about what it meant that he wore silver thread and carried no name. Did not think about the pull she had felt in the mud, or the way his eyes had found hers like he had been looking for her specifically. She thought about the morning instead, what the morning would require. The fire crackled. The rain fell. He slept eventually. His breathing deepened and steadied, and some of the terrible tension went out of his shoulders, and he looked, for just a moment, like something she did not have a word for. Josie stayed awake. That was what Omegas did, she had been told. They endured. They kept watch. They survived the night and asked nothing of the morning. She had always been very good at it. But for the first time in a long time, with a wounded stranger bleeding slowly on her only pallet and a forest full of hunters going quiet in the rain, she thought, something is about to change. She did not know if she meant it as a warning or a hope. Perhaps it was both. Dawn came gray and reluctant, pushing weak light through the cracks in the cabin walls and doing little to warm anything. Josie had not slept. She had fed the fire through the night in small, careful additions, keeping the smoke low so it would not rise above the tree line and draw attention. She had checked the wound dressing twice. She had listened to the forest with the particular attention of someone who had learned, young, that safety was not a state, but a practice. The stranger had slept hard and deep, the kind of sleep that bodies force on themselves when the alternative is death. His breathing had steadied by the middle of the night. The bleeding had slowed. She considered both facts with quiet relief and refused to examine why she felt any relief at all. When the gray light reached him, she looked at him properly for the first time without rain, an urgency obscuring everything. He was older than she had first thought. Not old. Perhaps a decade beyond her own 23 years. Perhaps a little more. The lines at the corners of his eyes and mouth were not from age alone. They were from weather and watchfulness, and the particular exhaustion of carrying things no one else could see. His hands, even relaxed in sleep, were a warrior's hands. The old scars she had noticed on his throat continued down his forearms, faded silver against darker skin. His face in stillness was severe and composed, the kind of face that did not easily invite approach. And yet she had approached. She was still approaching, in the small ways, checking his temperature with the back of her hand against his brow, adjusting the dressing, keeping the fire alive. Stop noticing things about him, she told herself firmly. He is a problem you are managing, not a person you are collecting. He woke just after first light. This time he came to consciousness slowly, without the violent lurch of the night before. His eyes opened, found the ceiling, then found her. She was sitting against the opposite wall with her market basket in her lap, taking inventory of what remained in it. "Good morning," she said without looking up. A pause. "You stayed," he said. "It's my cabin." "It isn't your cabin. You said it was abandoned." "I said it was empty." She looked up. "There's a difference. Empty things can still belong to someone." He watched her with those dark, still eyes. She had the feeling again of being read, of something behind his gaze moving carefully through information she hadn't consciously given him. It was uncomfortable. She was accustomed to being looked past, not looked at. "How is the wound?" she asked. He moved, testing. She saw the effort he controlled, the way he smoothed his expression before the pain could show on it. Manageable. "That means it hurts." "It means I've had worse." "That's not the same thing as manageable." She rose and crossed the cabin. He watched her approach without moving away, which she noted. Many men flinched when Omegas came close without permission. Old instinct, social reflex. He did not. "Let me see it." He allowed it. She unwrapped the dressing and examined the wound in the better light. It was deep, but clean. The edges were already pulling together in the way that shifter healing worked, faster than any human body, but still dependent on rest and time and not bleeding through another fight. "You're healing," she said. "You need another day, at least, possibly 2. "I don't have 2 days. Then you'll tear it open and bleed to death in someone's forest road, and I'll have wasted my pine oil." She rewrapped the dressing with practiced efficiency and sat back. The riders didn't return at dawn. The rain kept on through the night. They may have lost the trail. Something shifted in his expression. Not softness, exactly. Something more careful than that. You were listening for them, he said. All night. Why? Josie considered the question honestly. It deserved honesty, she thought, even if the answer was strange. I don't know, she said. I found you, and then I couldn't seem to stop. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what is your name? Josie. She paused. And I already know you won't tell me yours. Dominic. She hadn't expected that. She looked at him with slightly more attention. He had given it simply, without performance, like a man deciding in the moment that she had earned it. Dominic, she repeated, testing the weight of it. All right. The riders, he said then. Did you see their markings? 2 of them wore gray cloaks. The lead rider had a banner. I only caught a glimpse through the doorway. Red field, black tree. Something went very quiet in him. The kind of quiet that was not peace. You recognized it, she said. Yes. She waited. He did not elaborate. She had already learned that about him in the span of one night. He spoke when he chose to, and pressure did not accelerate the process. Are they going to come back? She asked instead. Yes. Today? Possibly. Josie stood and went to the leather panel at the door. She looked through the gap. The forest was still, the way forests were still when they were deciding something. The rain had stopped. The sky above the trees was the color of old pewter, flat and colorless. Then you need to be gone before midday, she said. Not because I'm turning you out. Because staying here will make it worse for both of us. She turned back. Can you walk? He pushed himself upright, slowly and with obvious effort. He made it to sitting. He considered the distance to standing. Yes, he said. It was not entirely convincing. There's a game trail north of here, she said, coming back to crouch in front of him, lowering her voice as though the trees might listen. It runs parallel to the river road for about 2 miles, and then branches east toward the highlands. If you follow it east, you'll come out above Veldmore near the old shepherd's ruins. No one patrols there. It's considered cursed ground. He looked at her steadily. Why are you helping me? It was the second time he had asked something close to that question. The first time, in the night, he had said you should have left me. Now he was asking the same thing differently, and she understood that he was not being rhetorical. He genuinely did not understand it. That told her something about the life he lived. I don't know that either, she said honestly. I'm choosing not to examine it too closely. A pause. Then something happened at the corner of his mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. That was not quite a smile, but was in the same family. The game trail, he said. Show me where it starts. I'll walk you to it. You don't need to... Dominic. She said his name with a firmness that surprised even her. You will walk into the wrong tree inside of 50 steps. Let me walk you to the trail. He looked at her. He did not argue. They left the cabin just before midday, moving through the forest in careful silence. He was better on his feet than she'd expected, but she could see what it cost him. The deliberate evenness of his gait, the way he controlled his breath, the small pauses he took when he thought she wasn't watching. She was always watching. It was a habit she couldn't shed. She did not offer her arm. She understood somehow that he would not take it. Not yet. Not in daylight. Not from her. She walked close enough that if he stumbled she could catch him, and she let that be enough. The forest was beginning to wake around them. A thrush called from somewhere overhead. Water dripped from the branches in rhythmic intervals. Somewhere to the west, far enough away to be a memory rather than a threat, she heard the distant whinny of a horse. She stopped. He stopped beside her. They listened together in silence for a long moment. The sound did not come again. West, she murmured, moving away. He nodded. They walked on. At the game trail she stopped and pointed. He looked at the path, then looked at her. He had a way of doing that, of completing one task, and then before moving on, turning back to her as though she were part of the task. Part of the accounting. "The ruins are marked by a split oak," she said. "You'll know it when you see it. The tree was struck by lightning years ago and never fell. It just kept growing in 2 directions. A tree that survived being split," he said. "Yes." He looked at her with something in his gaze that she did not have language for, something that sat between recognition and question. "Thank you, Josie," he said. She crossed her arms over her chest, mostly because she didn't know what to do with her hands. "Don't tear the dressing, and don't start a fight until the wound is properly closed or you'll undo everything. I'll keep that in mind. I mean it." "I know," he said. "I believe you always mean what you say." She didn't answer that. She watched him turn onto the trail, watched the forest take him in slowly, the way water takes a stone, surrounding, not swallowing. He did not look back. Josie stood at the edge of the trail for a long moment, after he disappeared. Then she walked back toward Veldmore, mud on her skirt, and pine oil on her hands, and something sitting quietly at the center of her chest that she had no name for yet. She did not know, walking back through the dripping forest, that by nightfall the village would be full of the king's soldiers. She did not know they were looking for a wolf. She did not know she had just hidden him. The soldiers arrived before supper. Josie heard them from the market square, where she had stopped to trade the last of her dried herbs for a portion of salted pork and a small round of hard cheese. She heard the horses first, too many, moving too fast for a patrol. And then the voices, loud and careless in the way that men were loud and careless when they carried authority borrowed from someone else. She did not run. Running attracted attention, and attention was the one thing an unaffiliated Omega in a shifter village could not afford. She folded her purchase into her basket, pulled her hood forward, and moved to the edge of the square with the unhurried pace of someone with nothing to hide. There were 12 of them. She counted without appearing to count. Gray cloaks, all of them, and the lead rider carried a banner she recognized now with the hollow certainty of confirmed suspicion. Red field, black tree. House Draven. She knew the name the way everyone in the outer villages knew it, not from proximity, but from the particular tone people used when they said it. Flat and careful, the way you spoke about weather that could kill you. Lord Caius Draven, second cousin to the crown. A man who, by most accounts, had spent 15 years quietly expanding his territorial reach, while the old Alpha King declined, and the question of succession became something everyone thought about, and no one said aloud. The lead soldier reined in at the center of the square, and let his horse turn a slow half-circle, surveying the gathered villagers with the particular laziness of someone who did not need to pretend respect. "We are searching for a fugitive," he announced. His voice carried the flat, practiced tone of a proclamation recited many times. A large male, dark hair, heavily wounded. He entered this forest region yesterday evening. Anyone found harboring him or concealing knowledge of his whereabouts will be held accountable under Lord Draven's authority. The square was very quiet. Josie looked at the ground near her left boot. There was a beetle making its determined way across the mud, navigating the enormous geography of a boot print. Lord Draven's authority, she thought carefully. Not the Crown's authority. Not the Alpha King's decree. That was interesting. She filed it away. The soldiers spread through the village with methodical efficiency. They entered homes without asking. They questioned the miller, the blacksmith, the woman who kept the tavern. Josie watched from her peripheral vision as 2 of them moved toward the edge of the square where she stood, and she made herself breathe evenly and think about nothing important. "You." One of them stopped in front of her. Young, with the sharp eyes of someone recently elevated and eager to prove it. "Omega, where were you last night?" "At the mill," she said. "Then home." "Home where?" "The room above the dyer's shop. Mistress Holt can confirm it." This was a small lie. Mistress Holt had confirmed many things for her over the years in exchange for herb medicines and the understanding that Josie would never ask about the gap in the accounts. But it was a practiced one. "Did you see anyone in the forest road? Coming from the highland side?" "No one," she said. "Only rain." He looked at her for a moment, with the evaluating stare that soldiers used as a form of authority. She returned it with the expression she had perfected over years of exactly these encounters. Present, cooperative, completely empty. He moved on. Josie waited until the soldiers had progressed to the far end of the village before she walked, at the same unhurried pace, back toward the dyer's shop. Once inside the low wooden gate, she stopped and put her back against the wall and closed her eyes and breathed. Lord Draven is hunting him. He wore silver thread. He spoke like a man accustomed to command. He has old battle scars. He gave no explanation for why he was alone and bleeding in the middle of the highland forest. She thought about the banner, the red field and black tree, moving away west this morning, the direction she had told him not to go. He had gone north. She had made sure of it. She opened her eyes and looked at the gray afternoon sky above the dyer's courtyard and thought, "I have made an enemy of House Draven without knowing his name. And now I know his name. And I still don't know what I've walked into." But she knew one thing with a clarity that surprised her with its steadiness. She did not regret it. 3 days passed. The soldiers remained in Veldmoor for 2 of them, which was 2 days longer than the village's collective patience lasted. They ate without paying. They questioned people twice. They watched the roads. On the second evening, Josie overheard 2 of them talking near the well, low and irritable, saying that the trail had gone cold and that Lord Draven would not be pleased, and that there were rumors the fugitive had crossed into Ashfin territory, which was not Draven's jurisdiction and never would be if the Ashfin Alpha had anything to say about it. On the 3rd morning, they were gone. Josie went back to the mill cabin that afternoon. She told herself it was to retrieve her belt, which was true. She did not examine the other reason too carefully. The cabin was empty. The pallet had been straightened, not with any great skill, but deliberately, as though someone had taken the time to do it even when they didn't have to. The clay cup she had left by the fire had been placed on the shelf. The remains of the fire had been banked properly. On the floor near the door, pressed under a small stone so it would not blow away, was a dried sprig of something she didn't immediately recognize. She picked it up and turned it over. Small leaves, dark green, with a faint resinous scent. She knew it eventually. It grew only in the highland regions, above the frost line. It had no common use in the villages. In older texts, the ones she had borrowed without permission from the village elder's shelf, returning them before dawn, it was called Laurenweed, and it had 1 recorded property. It was said to mark a debt unpaid. Josie stood in the empty cabin for a long moment with the sprig in her palm. Then she put it in her basket, retrieved her belt from under the pallet where it had fallen, and went back to Veldmoor. She did not see him for 11 days. In that time, several things happened. The village elder, a stout and self-important beta named Aldrich, called a gathering at the common hall and announced, with the gravity of a man delivering important news he had actually received weeks ago, that the succession question had become critical. The old Alpha King was dying. Everyone had known this for months, but the announcement made it official, and therefore frightening in a new way. Without a clear heir, the great packs would fracture. The outer territories, villages like Veldmoor, with no alpha of their own, existing in the gaps between larger jurisdictions, would be absorbed or abandoned. Neither option was comfortable. Lord Caius Draven's name circulated through the common hall like smoke. He was the most powerful noble with a viable claim. He had the military strength. He had the alliances. What he lacked, several people muttered, was legitimacy of blood. The Alpha King had no confirmed children, but there were old laws about lineage that Draven did not cleanly satisfy. Josie sat in the back of the hall and listened, and said nothing, and thought about silver thread and battle scars, and the particular quality of authority in a man's voice when it came not from position, but from something older. She thought about it for exactly as long as she allowed herself, which was not long. On the 11th day, she was at the well before dawn when she heard footsteps behind her that were too quiet to be careless and too deliberate to be accidental. She did not turn around immediately. "The wound," she said. "Is it closed?" "Yes." His voice was the same. Low, steady, carrying that quality of rest and watchfulness combined. "Fully." She turned then. He was cleaner than she had last seen him, though still plainly dressed. Good wool, dark colors, nothing that declared him. His hair was pulled back. The dark circles under his eyes had lightened. He stood at the edge of the well's shadow with his arms loose at his sides, watching her with an expression she was beginning to understand was his version of open. "You're still here," she said, "in the region. I had reasons to stay close." She looked at him carefully. "The soldiers are gone. I know. Draven's men." A pause. His expression did not change, but something in his stillness shifted slightly. "You heard the name." They said it themselves. Redfield, Black Tree. She set her water bucket down and straightened. They said they were acting under Lord Draven's authority, not the Crown's. "You noticed that distinction?" It seemed important. He looked at her for a long moment. The sky above them was just beginning to lighten, the dark peeling back at the eastern edge. A rooster called somewhere across the village. The ordinary world doing its ordinary things, completely unaware. "Josie," he said. Something in the way he said her name made her very still. He had said it before, once, at the trail. But this was different. This was the voice of a man choosing words with unusual care. "There are things I should tell you," he said. "About who I am. About why Draven's men were hunting me." She waited. "I didn't tell you before because I wasn't certain." He paused. "I'm certain now." "Certain of what?" He looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and she felt again that sensation of being seen fully, of something in his gaze moving through her carefully and finding more than she had intended to show. "That you are in danger," he said quietly, "because you helped me. And that the danger is already here. It came with the soldiers, and it will not leave with them. Draven will have left someone behind, someone watching." The morning air was cold on her face. "Someone watching me," she said. "Yes." Josie looked at the sky. The first real light was arriving, thin and pale, the color of river water in winter. "Then you had better come inside," she said, "and tell me everything." She picked up her bucket. She did not wait to see if he followed. He did. She brought him to the room above the dyer's shop before the village woke properly. It was a small space. A pallet, a trunk, a table with 2 stools, a window that faced the courtyard rather than the street. Josie had lived in it for 2 years, and in that time she had made it neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. It was functional the way she had learned to be functional, without excess, without apology. She poured water into the clay basin on the table, and set bread and hard cheese between them, and sat down across from him, and folded her hands, and waited. Dominic sat with his elbows on the table, and looked at the bread without seeing it, and was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to tell her he was choosing where to begin. "The Alpha King," he said finally. "His name is Edren. He has been ill for 8 months, longer than the court has admitted publicly." "The Elder announced it 3 days ago," Josie said. "The succession question. What the Elder announced is already out of date." His voice was even, measured, but she could hear something moving underneath it. Not fear. Nothing so clean as fear. Something more like the weight of consequence. Edren is not merely ill. He is dying within weeks. Possibly days. And there is no named heir. Draven claims the right. Draven has been preparing the claim for 4 years, quietly, Methodically. Dominic's jaw tightened. He has removed obstacles, bought councils, installed his people in positions that look administrative and function as control. He paused. And he has been hunting me for 11 months. Josie looked at him steadily across the table. Why? The silence that followed was not evasion. It was the silence of a man who had carried something alone for a very long time, and was now, in a small room above a dyer's shop at dawn, deciding whether to set it down. Because I am the obstacle he has not yet removed, Dominic said. She heard it in his voice before the words arranged themselves into meaning. She heard it in the particular flatness of his delivery, the way someone spoke about themselves when the truth was so large it had become almost abstract. She looked at him. He met her eyes. Edrin has no acknowledged children, he said. But he has a nephew, his sister's son. Legitimized by blood law 7 years ago when Edrin signed the document of lineage recognition. A pause. My mother was Edrin's sister. She died when I was 14. Edrin recognized me formally at 21. The room was very quiet. You are the heir, Josie said. I am the heir. She sat with that for a moment, sat with the image of him bleeding in the mud, folded against a root, unconscious and alone in the highland rain, while Draven's riders searched the forest with hounds and torches, sat with the memory of pressing her palms against his wound and telling herself it was only instinct. Draven tried to kill you, she said. 4 times in 11 months. The Highland ambush was the closest he has come. Something moved across his face. Not bitterness exactly, but its older, quieter relative. I had been traveling without my guard, a calculated risk that was poorly calculated. Where is your guard now? 2 of them are dead. The others lost the trail during the ambush. They will be searching. He looked at her directly. But Draven will be searching harder. And as I said, he left someone behind in Veldmore. You know who? I have a suspicion. He reached into his coat and placed something on the table between them. A small token, iron, stamped with a symbol she did not immediately recognize. A circle bisected by a diagonal line. This was pressed into the mud outside this building yesterday evening. A calling mark. Draven's informants used them to signal position. Josie looked at it without touching it. Someone knows I helped you. Someone suspects. They don't have confirmation yet, or you would already have been taken in for questioning. He said it plainly, without softening it. She appreciated that. False comfort had always felt to her like a second betrayal. But they will move soon, probably within a day. She breathed in slowly and breathed out, and looked at the token on the table. What do you need from me? She asked. He looked at her with something that was not surprise, but contained surprise within it, the way a stone wall contains the memory of the water that shaped it. Most people, he said carefully, upon learning what I've just told you, ask what they should do, where they should go, how they should protect themselves. I'm asking what you need, she said. The rest follows from that. A long pause. There is a man in the village, Dominic said. A farrier named Ossian. Gray-bearded, works near the south gate. He is not what he appears. He has been in Veldmore for 6 weeks, long enough to establish himself, short enough that no one knows him deeply. I need to know who he reports to and by what method. Messages, signals, dead drops. He paused. I need someone who can move through this village without drawing attention. Someone Draven's people would dismiss. An Omega, he meant. He did not say it, but she heard it. She had spent years being dismissed. It had never felt like a resource before. I know Ossian, she said. He buys herbs from me. Fennel root and dried chamomile, he says, for stomach trouble. She looked at Dominic steadily. He doesn't have stomach trouble. He drinks the infusion cold, which means he doesn't want the calming effect. Just the scent. To cover something else. Dominic was very still. Cover what? he asked quietly. I don't know yet, but I can find out. She stood and moved to the window, looking down into the empty courtyard. The dyer's apprentice would arrive within the hour. She needed to think quickly. There's a gathering tonight at the common hall. Elder Aldrich calls them weekly. Ossian attends. I've seen him there, always at the back, always near the eastern door. She turned back. If he carries messages, he passes them at night. The eastern door opens onto the alley behind the cooperage. I know that alley. Dominic rose from the stool. He was looking at her with that full, careful attention again, and she made herself hold it instead of looking away. You don't have to do this, he said. You said I'm already in danger. That's not. If I'm already in danger, she said, then caution is no longer the safest choice. It's only the most comfortable one. She crossed her arms. I've been comfortable and at risk for 3 years in this village. I would like to try something different. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you are not what I expected. What did you expect? He seemed to consider the honest answer. Fear, he said finally, or calculation. Most people, when they discover what I am, choose one or the other. I haven't chosen either. No, he agreed. You haven't. She looked at him in the early light, and thought that he looked for just a moment like someone who had been carrying stone for a very long time, and had just felt the weight shift slightly. Not lifted, just shared. She looked away first, because she did not trust what her face might show. You should stay here today, she said, moving toward the door. Don't go to the window. Don't open the door unless it's me. I'll bring food at midday. She paused with her hand on the latch. And Dominic, yes, when this is over, when you have what you need from Ossian, you will tell me what you plan to do next. Not because I'm asking for a debt, because I am now involved in something I don't fully understand, and I refuse to be kept uninformed. A pause. Yes, he said again, but differently this time. With a weight to it that felt like agreement, made not from obligation, but from choice. She left him there and went down into the morning. The common hall that night smelled of tallow candles, damp wool, and the particular anxiety of a community that had heard bad news and not yet decided what to do with it. Elder Aldrich spoke at length about the succession and border security and the importance of maintaining neutrality, which Josie translated privately as, "Do not draw the attention of anyone powerful." She sat 3 rows from the back and watched Ossian. He was exactly where she had predicted. Eastern door, back wall, positioned to observe without being observed. He looked like a farrier. He had the hands for it, and the posture, and the general air of a man with no strong opinions about politics. But his eyes moved differently than a farrier's eyes. Too systematic. Too brief on each face. Too deliberate in their return to the door. At the 3/4 mark of the elder's address, Ossian shifted his weight to his left foot. It was subtle. It was the kind of thing you noticed, only if you were watching for exactly that kind of signal. A man near the front of the hall, seated beside the blacksmith, shifted his own weight left in response. Josie did not look directly at the second man. She marked his position from the corner of her eye and continued watching Aldrich with the expression of a citizen attending to civic duty. When the gathering ended, she did not go to the alley. She went home. She walked slowly, taking the long way past the cooperage, and what she saw in the alley she catalogued carefully and completely. A small bundle wedged behind the 3rd barrel from the door, wrapped in oilcloth. She did not touch it. She went upstairs. Dominic was at the table. He looked up when she came in. She pulled her stool close and sat and told him everything. Ossian's signal, the second man, the position of the bundle, in precise, quiet sequence. And he listened without interrupting, his expression growing more focused with each detail. When she finished, he was still for a long moment. "The second man," he said. "Describe him again." She did, Something crossed Dominic's face that was not anger, but lived in the same territory. Hard and cold and arrived at through clarity rather than heat. His name is Pren, he said. He has been with Draven for 9 years. He is not a soldier. He is a coordinator. He paused. He will carry the bundle to the Eastern Road tonight. Where it goes from there tells me where Draven's nearest command post is. Then we need to follow him. Dominic looked at her. We, he said. She met his eyes without flinching. You can't follow him alone. You're still healing and he'll recognize you. I'm an Omega woman who goes to market before dawn. No one will look at me twice. A long silence. You are? Dominic said slowly. Extraordinarily difficult to argue with. I've been told that, she said. It's never been meant as a compliment. I've chosen to take it as one. For the first time since she had known him, since she had found him bleeding in the mud, since she had cleaned his wound and walked him to the trail and told him not to tear the dressing. She saw something break across his face that was unmistakably, undeniably a smile. It lasted only a moment. But she felt it for much longer. They followed Pren through the dark. Josie led, because she knew which boards on the Cooperage steps creaked, and Dominic did not, and because the night made her invisible in the way she had always been invisible. Thoroughly, completely, without effort. She moved through the alley's shadow with her basket on her arm and her hood forward, and anyone who glanced her way saw only an Omega woman with somewhere quiet to be. Dominic moved behind her with the controlled stillness of something that had learned to make itself small, despite every instinct against it. She could feel his presence more than hear it. A warmth at her back. A steadiness that had no sound. Pren collected the bundle from behind the third barrel and walked east without looking back. They followed him through the sleeping village, past the blacksmith's dark forge, past the well, past the last row of houses where the road became a track and the track became forest. The night was cold and clear, the earlier rain gone entirely, the stars present and indifferent above the tree line. Half a mile into the forest, Pren stopped at a place where 2 tracks diverged. He gave a low whistle, 2 notes, and waited. From the right-hand track came a rider. Josie pressed herself against the trunk of a wide oak. Dominic was beside her, close enough that she could feel the tension in him. Contained, directed, nothing wasted on alarm. The rider took the bundle without dismounting. There was a brief exchange, voices too low to carry. Then the rider turned and moved east at a canter, and Pren turned and walked back toward the village. They waited until both sounds faded completely. East, Dominic said quietly. The Ashfin Ridge Road. 3 hours' ride puts you at Carden's Crossing, which is the last waypoint before Draven's eastern garrison. His voice was level and precise. He has a command post there, close enough to move on the capital within a day if the king dies and the succession announcement comes. Josie looked at the empty track. How many men? At Carden's Crossing? Perhaps 40. Perhaps more by now. He paused. But that is not the immediate problem. The immediate problem is what was in that bundle. She looked at him. A message, he said. Which means Draven now knows approximately where I am. He will send a retrieval force. Not a hunting party this time. Something organized. His jaw was set, the line of it hard in the moonlight. We have perhaps until dawn to be gone from Veldmore. We, he had said. She noticed it and said nothing. Where would we go? She asked instead. North, into Ashfin territory. My father's generation had an alliance with the Ashfin Alpha. It was never formally broken, only neglected. If I can reach their border and present credentials, I can request sanctuary and send word to my remaining guard. He looked at her directly. There is a risk. Ashfin may choose neutrality. They may send us back. And if they do, then we find another way. He said it with the quiet certainty of someone who had been finding other ways for 11 months and had not yet run out of them. Josie looked at the dark track for a moment. She thought about her room above the dyer's shop. The trunk with its 3 dresses and its small bundle of coin, and the book she had borrowed and never returned because no one had noticed it was gone. She thought about Veldmoor and the 3 years she had spent in it, being tolerated, being dismissed, being the Omega woman with no pack and no name that mattered. She thought about how none of it had ever felt like home. "I'll need an hour," she said, "to collect what I have." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Josie, you understand what I'm asking you to walk into." "You're not asking," she said. "I'm choosing." She met his eyes. "There is a difference. You said so yourself, in a way, about mate bonds and destiny. The difference between what finds you and what you choose." He looked at her with an expression she had no complete word for. It was not surprise anymore. It had moved past surprise into something steadier and more serious, something that sat in his eyes like a fixed point. "1 hour," he said quietly. She went. They rode north before the village stirred. Dominic had a horse. She did not ask where it had come from, and he did not explain, and she decided that some questions were best answered by time. She rode behind him, her small bundle across her knees, her cloak pulled close against the cold that came with the last hour before dawn. The horse moved steadily through the forest road, and the forest was dark and enormous and completely indifferent to them, which she found, unexpectedly, a comfort. She had expected the silence between them to be difficult. It was not. It was the kind of silence that had been earned rather than imposed, and it sat between them without weight. After some time, he said, "You asked me once why the mate bond matters." She thought back. "I asked why Draven cared about stopping you. You asked the broader question underneath it. About bonds. About what they mean when they're not chosen." She was quiet, listening. "My parents had a chosen bond," he said. "Not fated. They recognized nothing particular in each other at first meeting. But they chose over time, and the bond formed from that choice." His voice was careful, as though he was placing each word with intention. "My mother used to say that the bond was the record of what they had decided, that it grew stronger each time they chose again." Josie thought about that. The horse moved beneath them, rhythmic and warm. "And you?" she asked. "Do you believe that?" A long pause. "I didn't used to," he said. "I thought fated bonds were simpler, cleaner. Something you found rather than built." Another pause. "I've revised that position." She did not ask him to say more. She let it rest there, between them, and the forest opened around them gradually, the trees thinning, the sky above beginning its slow shift from black to the deep blue that preceded dawn. The Ashfen border was marked by a stone wall, very old, more symbol than barrier. They crossed it at first light. The Ashfen Alpha's name was Gareth, and he was a broad, weathered man of 50, with gray at his temples, and the measuring eyes of someone who had governed a long time, without becoming comfortable with it. He received them in the great hall of the border keep, still in his night robe with a fur thrown over it, which Josie took as either a sign of good faith, or a sign that he had been awake already, and had chosen deliberate informality to set a tone. Dominic stood before him, and gave his full name and lineage, and the document of recognition, which he produced from an inner pocket, oilcloth wrapped, carefully preserved even through the highland mud and the rain. Gareth read it without expression. He looked at Dominic. He looked at Josie briefly, with the particular evaluation of someone accustomed to reading situations rather than people. Then he sat back and said, "I heard Edrin was dying." "He is," Dominic said. "Draven has half the eastern road sewn up." "I know. You have no army." "Not yet." Gareth was quiet for a long moment. A fire burned at the far end of the hall. Somewhere above them, a shutter rattled in the wind. "Your mother," Gareth said finally, "came to my father's hall once when I was a boy. She was 17. She argued a border dispute and won it in under an hour without raising her voice." A pause. "I always thought the wrong one went into politics." Something moved across Dominic's face, old and quiet. She would have agreed with you, he said. Gareth stood. I'll send riders to your guard's last known position. I'll open the eastern passage for messages to the capital. He looked at Dominic steadily. I won't commit soldiers until I know which way the council falls. That is the limit of what I can promise. It is enough, Dominic said. Thank you. Gareth nodded. He moved to leave, then paused, and looked back at Josie with a directness that startled her slightly. And you, he said. What is your place in this? She was quiet for a moment. I'm not certain yet, she said honestly. Gareth almost smiled. At least you're honest. He left. The weeks that followed were neither simple nor swift. Dominic's guard found them within 4 days, 7 men, exhausted and furious at having lost him, and deeply suspicious of Josie until they were not. She earned their wariness first, which she understood, and their respect later, which she had not expected. She learned their names. She learned the shape of the plan that emerged across long hours at Gareth's table, maps spread wide, voices quiet and precise. Draven moved first, as expected. When the announcement of King Edrin's death reached the eastern provinces, he declared his claim loudly and moved his garrison force toward the capital. What he did not know was that the Capital Council, presented with Dominic's document of recognition and the written support of the Ashvin Alpha and 2 other border lords, had already made its decision. The legitimacy of blood, the old laws stated, preceded the legitimacy of force. Draven arrived at the capital gates to find them closed against him. He retreated to Carden's Crossing and was met there, 3 days later, by Dominic's force. Smaller than Draven's, more precise. Pren was taken in the first hour. Ossian, who had remained in Veldmore apparently unaware that his operation had been compromised, was collected quietly by 2 of Dominic's guard and brought east in a covered cart. Neither man was executed. Both were imprisoned, tried before the council, and sentenced by law rather than vengeance. Josie had asked for that, specifically. She had sat across from Dominic the night before the council hearing and said, "Do it by law, or it means nothing." He had looked at her for a long moment and said yes, and he had done it exactly that way. Draven himself, faced with the council's ruling and the collapse of his eastern support, surrendered his claim. He was stripped of his border territories and confined to his ancestral seat under permanent guard. It was a measured consequence. It was the kind of ending that felt less like victory than like a door being finally closed. Josie understood, watching the council proceedings from the gallery above the hall, that this was what justice actually looked like. Not fire, not ruin. A closed door and the law's quiet wait. The night after the council ruling, Dominic found her in the gallery. She had stayed after the others left, looking down at the empty hall below, the long tables, the extinguished candles, the documents still spread across the central surface. He stood beside her and looked at the same view. "It's done," she said. "Most of it," he agreed. She thought about Veldmore, the room above the dyer's shop, the small bundle of coin and the borrowed book, and the 3 years of being no one's anything. She thought about the mud and the rain and the root of the fallen oak, and a man bleeding, and her own hands moving without her permission, toward something she had not understood. "What happens now?" she asked, not frightened, genuinely asking. He turned to look at her, and the quality of his attention was the same as it had always been, full, careful, nothing withheld. But underneath it now was something she recognized because she had felt it herself, growing slowly over weeks of shared danger and shared silence and the particular intimacy of planning things together in the small hours. "That depends," he said, "on what you want." She looked at him. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." He paused. "I know what I want, Josie. I've known for longer than I had a right to know it, given that you were still deciding whether to trust me at all." She thought about her mother's saying that she had invented for herself over the years, the closest thing she had to inherited wisdom. Empty things can still belong to someone. She thought about the Laurenweed sprig on the cabin floor. A debt unpaid. "I'm still deciding some things," she said carefully. "About trust. About what I want my life to look like." She held his gaze. "But I am no longer deciding whether I trust you." He was quiet. She could see what the words meant to him. Not the relief of possession, but the weight of being seen clearly and still chosen. "That's enough," he said softly. "That is more than enough." She looked back at the empty hall below and felt something in her chest settle, slow and thorough, like water finding its level after a long disturbance. They were married in early spring, in the capital's old stone hall, with Gareth of Ashven as witness, and Dominic's 7 guards standing at the back, making an effort to look ceremonial. The ceremony was not elaborate. Josie had asked for it that way, and Dominic had not argued. She wore deep green wool, her hair loose, and she carried nothing in her hands because she had learned that she did not need to carry things to make them matter. When the bond was spoken aloud, not by obligation, but because she had chosen it, fully, with open eyes, she felt it complete in the way her mother might have described, like a record being made of a decision that had already been true for some time. Dominic's hand was warm over hers. His eyes, when she looked at him, held nothing back. She was 23 years old, and she had been no one's anything for long enough. She was done with that. Ossian served his sentence, and returned years later to a village far from Veldmore, under a different name, and was never heard from again. Pren spent the remainder of his years in a quiet northern prison, and made no trouble. Lord Caius Draven lived out his confinement in his ancestral seat, and died, 6 years later, of a winter fever, having never recovered his claim or his purpose, which was perhaps the most fitting consequence of all. Elder Aldrich of Veldmore received a formal letter from the new Alpha King's Council, requesting that the village be incorporated under direct crown protection. He accepted with the particular enthusiasm of a man who had always privately considered himself important, and was grateful to finally have it confirmed. Gareth of Ashven remained an ally, and, in time, something closer to a friend. He attended the naming ceremony for Dominic and Josie's first child 3 years later, and told Josie, afterward, that she reminded him of someone he had met once, briefly, a long time ago. She told him she didn't know who he meant. He smiled and said, "You will." Josie stood at the window of the king's study on a late autumn evening, looking out at the courtyard below, where the last of the day's light lay gold and quiet across the stone. She could hear the distant sound of the guard changing at the gate. Somewhere below, a fire was being lit in the great hall. Dominic came to stand beside her. He carried 2 cups of warmed cider, and he set one on the sill near her hand without comment, the way he did things that he knew she needed before she said so. She picked it up. Outside, the light was fading. The courtyard emptied. The evening settled over the capital with the slow weight of ordinary peace. "I've been thinking," she said. About empty things." She looked at the courtyard. "About belonging." He was quiet beside her, present and unhurried. "I spent 3 years being nothing's anything," she said. "And I used to think that was the worst thing. To be unclaimed, to be passed over." She paused. "But I think now it was only the way the path looked from that particular place in it. Not the end of the path. Just one part of the view." Dominic looked at her the way he had always looked at her, completely, without reservation. "And from here?" he asked. She looked at the last of the light on the stone, warm and certain, and already beginning to deepen into something else. "From here," she said. "It looks like exactly where I was always going." She did not need to say more. He did not ask for more. The evening came in full and soft and real, and they stood together at the window until the courtyard was dark, and the fire in the hall below had found its steady light, and the world outside was quiet, and everything that had been broken had been, at last, repaired.